Will Smith just resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. The announcement a week after he slapped Chris Rock live on the Oscars telecast. In a statement, Will Smith wrote that his actions were shocking, painful, and inexcusable.
The night Will Smith walked onto that Oscars stage and slapped Chris Rock across the face, the whole world stopped. Phones lit up. Group chats exploded. News anchors stumbled over their words live on air. But here's the thing, nobody was talking about in those first chaotic hours. The slap wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far more damaging for Will Smith. Because when you hit a comedian, you don't silence him. You give him material. And when you hit one comedian, you make an enemy of all of them. What happened over the next 2 years would shake Hollywood to its foundation. Chris Rock didn't just recover, he went on the offensive with one of the most devastating comedy takedowns in television history. Dave Chappelle didn't just survive his own onstage attack, he used it to expose something uncomfortable about Will Smith that nobody in Hollywood wanted to say out loud. And together, these two men didn't just respond to Will Smith, they dismantled him, piece by piece, joke by joke, truth by truth. So what exactly did Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle reveal? And why does it spell serious, possibly permanent damage to whatever is left of Will Smith's reputation? Stay with us, because this story goes much deeper than a slap. The night everything changed. Let's go back to March 27, 2022, the 94th Academy Awards, the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. One of the most glamorous nights in entertainment, cameras everywhere, celebrities dressed in millions of dollars worth of fashion, the world watching. Chris Rock took the stage to present the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature, dressed in a blue velvet tuxedo jacket, completely unaware that his life was about to change in front of a global audience. Now, Chris had history with the Smiths. Back in 2016, he hosted the Oscars during the so-called Oscars So White controversy.
Well, I'm here at the Academy Awards, otherwise known as the White People's Choice Awards,
when Jada Pinkett Smith led a public boycott over the lack of diversity in nominations. Will Smith had been overlooked for his performance in Concussion, and Jada made a very public statement that she wouldn't be attending. Chris, being Chris, addressed it during his monologue. He cracked a joke about Jada boycotting the Oscars being like him boycotting Rihanna's panties because he wasn't invited.
Jada boycotting the Oscars is like me boycotting Rihanna's panties. I wasn't invited.
The audience laughed. Jada did not forget. Fast forward 6 years to 2022, and Chris looks out into the audience and notices Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head. Jada had been open about her alopecia, an autoimmune condition that causes hair loss. Chris made what he would later call the nicest joke he ever told. A quick G.I. Jane 2 reference, comparing Jada's look to Demi Moore's iconic shaved head role from 1997. Mild. Observational.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right?
The kind of joke that gets a light chuckle and moves on. The camera caught Jada rolling her eyes. Will Smith initially laughed, and then something shifted. Will Smith stood up from his seat. He walked calmly, and that calm is important, because it wasn't impulsive. He walked deliberately onto that stage. Chris stood there holding the microphone, completely exposed, with nowhere to go and no security stepping in. And then Will Smith slapped Chris Rock across the face with an open hand so hard the sound cracked through the entire sound system.
Oh, wow! Wow!
The theater erupted in confused murmurs. Was it staged? Even Chris wasn't sure at first. Then Will Smith's voice boomed from his front row seat, twice, telling Chris in the most explicit terms to keep his wife's name out of his mouth. No bleep, no cut.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth!
Wow, dude!
Broadcast internationally for the entire world to witness. Chris Rock, visibly shaken, still reeling, tried to salvage the moment with the only tool he had: humor. He told the stunned audience it was the greatest night in the history of television. Think about the professionalism that takes. Think about the composure required to crack a joke seconds after being assaulted on live television in front of millions of people. That moment alone tells you everything you need to know about who Chris Rock is under pressure. And what happened next? Nothing. No security escorted Will Smith out. No Academy official intervened. The show continued as if one of Hollywood's biggest stars hadn't just committed assault on the most-watched award show on Earth. Less than 40 minutes later, Will Smith stood on that same stage and accepted the Best Actor award for King Richard.
Will
Receiving a standing ovation from an industry that had just watched him hit a presenter for making a mild joke. He cried. He talked about love. He talked about being a vessel for God. He got applause. Ask yourself this: what does it say about Hollywood that the man who committed the assault got the standing ovation? The comedy world responds. The aftermath was immediate, and it was loud. Social media fractured down familiar lines. Some people defended Will, framing the slap as a husband protecting his wife's honor. Others condemned him outright. But there was one group where the response was completely unified: the comedy community. Jim Carrey went on CBS Mornings and didn't hold back a single word. He said plainly that you do not have the right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words. He said that if he were in Chris's position, he would have sued Will Smith for $200 million, because that video was going to be there forever. Then Carrey turned his fire on Hollywood itself, calling out the industry's moral bankruptcy for giving a standing ovation to a man who had just committed assault. He used a specific word for it: spineless. The entire room was spineless. Bill Maher pointed out that alopecia is not leukemia. Ricky Gervais noted sarcastically that he was fat and balding and nobody was offering him special treatment. The message from comedians across the board was the same. This was an attack on the art form itself, not just on one performer. Because here's what people outside the comedy world often miss. Comedy requires vulnerability. It requires risk. It requires the freedom to say something that might offend someone, knowing the social contract protects you from physical retaliation. The moment you remove that protection, the entire ecosystem breaks down. Will Smith resigned from the Academy on April 1st, 4 days after the slap. The Academy's board subsequently banned him from attending the Oscars for 10 years. He kept his Best Actor award. Depending on who you ask, the punishment was either too severe or not nearly enough, because not a single criminal charge was filed. Chris Rock declined to press charges. He also declined to speak publicly about the incident for nearly a year, turning down interviews and media appearances, refusing to let the moment define him or give Will the satisfaction of watching him play victim. His silence was its own statement, but the silence couldn't last forever. And when Chris Rock finally broke it, he broke it in spectacular fashion. Dave Chappelle gets attacked, and everything connects. Before we get to Chris Rock's massive response, we need to talk about what happened just 5 weeks after the Oscars slap, because it changed the entire conversation. Dave Chappelle was performing stand-up at the Hollywood Bowl as part of Netflix's Netflix is a Joke Festival. Thousands of fans in the crowd. A career-defining night for one of comedy's most influential voices. Then, toward the end of his set, a 23-year-old man named Isaiah Lee jumped a barrier, rushed the stage, and tackled Chappelle to the ground.
Comedian Dave Chappelle was attacked by an audience member who charged the stage during a live performance at the Hollywood Bowl.
Lee was carrying a replica gun fitted with a folding knife blade. This wasn't heckling. This wasn't a verbal confrontation. This was a physical attack with a weapon at one of the most high-profile comedy events in recent memory. Jamie Foxx and Busta Rhymes were among the celebrity audience members who immediately helped subdue Lee. Security swarmed the stage. Lee was arrested and charged with 4 misdemeanors: battery, possession of a weapon with intent to assault, unauthorized stage access, and interference with a performance. Chappelle was shaken, but physically uninjured. 2 days later, he performed a secret set at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles. And who joined him on that stage? Chris Rock. Their exchange that night became instant comedy legend. Chappelle joked to Chris that at least Chris got smacked by someone of repute, while Chappelle himself got tackled by what he described as a homeless man with leaves in his hair. Chris fired back with the line that would define this entire chapter of the story. He said he got smacked by the softest person that ever rapped. The crowd lost it. And the reason it landed so perfectly was because it wasn't just an insult. It was a layered, precise dismantling. Will Smith had a rap career in the early 1990s. Hits like Gettin' Jiggy With It and Summertime. Clean, radio-friendly, commercially massive, but never street, never hard, never earning the kind of credibility that comes with actual toughness. Calling Will the softest rapper wasn't just mocking him, it was exposing the entire performance of toughness that the slap was supposed to project. Will wanted the world to see him as a fierce protector. Chris Rock, with one sentence, told the world he saw something else entirely. Now here's the question that the comedy world was asking in those weeks. Was the attack on Chappelle connected to the slap? Not directly. Isaiah Lee had his own issues, his own motivations. But comedy club owners across America made the connection immediately. Danny Zoldan, owner of Stand Up New York, said something that stopped everyone cold. She said that before the Will Smith incident, there was an invisible fence around comedians. People just didn't breach it. They might heckle, they might boo, they might walk out, but they didn't rush stages. They didn't put hands on performers. And after Will's slap, she said she knew right away there would be copycats. Because Will Smith broke the barrier. He made it feel accessible. He made it feel acceptable. Howie Mandel took it even further, stating that violence triggers violence and that the slap had opened the floodgates. Whether or not you agree with the hyperbole, the pattern was undeniable. Within 5 weeks of Will Smith assaulting a comedian on the most watched stage in entertainment, another comedian had been physically attacked. The invisible fence was gone. Chris Rock and Chappelle take the stage together. 4 months after both attacks, Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle did something nobody expected. They went on tour together. Starting September 1st, 2022 at the M&S Bank Arena in Liverpool, England, the two most high-profile victims of onstage violence in recent history performed on the same stages in front of sold-out European audiences.
Come on, get this fucking picture.
This nigga is confused as fuck. What's up?
Come in,
What are you
man.
gonna name this joke, Chris?
Come in.
The tour had been planned before either attack, but it became the global platform where both men addressed what had happened and what it meant. Liverpool was where Chris first publicly rejected Will Smith's apology. Will had posted a YouTube video in July 2022 addressing Chris directly for the first time since the slap, expressing remorse and promising that they would be able to be friends again. Chris's response from the Liverpool stage was blunt and unambiguous. He said he didn't care. He told the audience he thought he was going to die. He described Will's video as a hostage video, not genuine remorse, but a calculated PR move designed to rehabilitate Will's image rather than actually make things right. Think about what that tells you. Will Smith waited months, crafted a video, posted it publicly, tried to frame the narrative, and the man he slapped looked at it and called it fake. That's not forgiveness withheld. That's a man who knows the difference between someone genuinely sorry and someone performing an apology for cameras. Chris also brought back the physical dimension. He noted that Will had played Muhammad Ali in a movie. While he himself couldn't even play Floyd Mayweather. The size disparity between them wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. Will Smith had trained for a role as one of the greatest fighters who ever lived. Chris Rock is a slim comedian who holds a microphone for a living, and Will chose him as a target. Chris called Will Sug Smith from that Liverpool stage, a reference to Suge Knight, the former Death Row Records executive currently serving a 28-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter. The comparison was deliberate and devastating. It wasn't calling Will a criminal. It was suggesting that Will's violence revealed something underneath the polished surface that had nothing to do with protecting anyone's honor. Then, Dave Chappelle took the stage. And what he said landed differently from everything Chris said. Not because it was softer, but because it came from a different place entirely. Chappelle told that Liverpool crowd something that reframed the entire incident. He said that a lot of people forget who Will Smith actually is. That 10 minutes before he was about to receive the biggest award of his career, he acted like he was back in Philadelphia. He was referencing Will's upbringing in West Philly, the suggestion being that beneath 30 years of blockbusters and brand deals and Fresh Prince charm, something older and rawer still lived. And the Oscars, of all places, is where it finally came out. Then Chappelle said the thing that everyone carried home from that night. He said Will Smith wore the mask of a perfect person for 30 years, and at the Oscars, he ripped that mask off and showed the world he was just as ugly as the rest of us. And Chappelle said he hoped Will wouldn't put the mask back on. He wanted Will to let his real face breathe. That is not the statement of a man looking to destroy someone. That is the statement of a man who has spent his entire career thinking about authenticity, about the price of performing a version of yourself for public consumption, and about what happens when the performance cracks. Chappelle saw something in Will Smith that the rest of the commentary missed. Not a villain, but a man who finally broke under the weight of his own carefully constructed image. He also said he saw himself in both men. That admission is extraordinary. Chappelle wasn't positioning himself as the victim or the judge. He was saying he understood Chris's pain and Will's rage, because those things live in all of us. Fame doesn't kill those feelings. It compresses them until they explode. Selective outrage. Chris Rock's devastating special. On Saturday, March 4th, 2023, almost exactly 1 year after the slap, Netflix aired its first-ever live comedy special, Chris Rock performing Selective Outrage, broadcast from Baltimore's Hippodrome Theater.
It was so hot, I thought we were going to see the devil.
Netflix hyped it like a sporting event. Pre-shows, after-shows, celebrity appearances. It was billed as the comedy Super Bowl, and Chris Rock delivered something that exceeded every expectation and then some. Chris took the stage in all white, with a Prince necklace, and opened by joking that he was going to try his best not to offend anybody, because you never know who might get triggered. The audience erupted. For 60 minutes, he worked through woke culture, the Kardashians, Meghan Markle, and a range of social topics. He defined selective outrage, being specifically choosy about who gets canceled for which offenses. He used the comparison of Michael Jackson versus R. Kelly. People still play Michael's songs, but not R. Kelly's, he noted, even though both faced similar accusations. The difference? One of them just made better songs. The crowd was alive with it. And then, with 10 minutes remaining in the special, Chris shifted tone. The entire atmosphere changed. He had waited a year for this. He had stayed silent for a year while the world debated what happened and why, and whether he deserved it. Now it was his turn. He started by acknowledging what happened to him, getting smacked by someone he'd had genuine respect for his whole life. He told the audience that the slap still hurts, and then he said that he still has summertime ringing in his ears. That line was surgical. He took Will Smith's biggest hit, the song that defined Will's musical legacy, and turned it into a punchline about the physical pain of being assaulted. Will's artistic achievement became the soundtrack to Chris's suffering. That's not just comedy, that's poetry. He established the physical reality of what happened. Will Smith is significantly bigger than Chris Rock. That matters. It matters because every voice that asked why Chris didn't fight back was ignoring the plain truth. Will played Muhammad Ali in a film. Chris played Pookie in New Jack City and a piece of corn in Pootie Tang. The self-deprecating comparison wasn't weakness. It was Chris acknowledging reality while completely maintaining his dignity. He wasn't claiming victimhood. He was exposing absurdity. Then Chris went somewhere that sent shockwaves through the audience and through Hollywood. He talked about Jada Pinkett Smith. He invoked one specific word: entanglements. If you've been following the Smith story, you know exactly what that word means. In a Red Table Talk episode that became one of the most watched celebrity confessionals in internet history, Jada discussed her relationship with singer August Alsina while she and Will were together. She used the word entanglement to describe it. The internet never forgot. And now, in front of millions watching live on Netflix, Chris Rock used that word too, and the crowd absolutely detonated. Chris said plainly that everyone knew what happened, and everyone who really knew understood he had nothing to do with that situation because he didn't have any entanglements. He went on to say that Jada's involvement with her son's friend was something he normally would never discuss, but that these people chose to put that situation on the internet themselves. He wasn't digging it up, they aired it publicly. Then he delivered the central argument of the entire special. He said Jada hurt Will far more than he ever hurt Chris. He pointed out that people across the world called Will humiliating names and called Jada a predator. But who did Will hit? He hit Chris Rock. Someone Will knew he could beat. Someone who wouldn't fight back. Someone smaller. Someone safer. Chris called it plainly. Some weak behavior. That analysis hit harder than any of the jokes because it reframed the entire incident. The slap wasn't about defending Jada's honor. It was about a man who had been publicly humiliated by his wife's affair, stripped of his dignity by internet mockery, unable to confront the actual sources of his pain, and so he hit the one person in his line of sight who couldn't hurt him back, a comedian holding a microphone. Not Jada, not August Alsina, not the millions of people on social media calling him names. Chris Rock, safe, smaller, televised, the perfect target for a man who needed to perform strength without actually risking anything. Chris also addressed the 2016 history directly. He explained that Jada had started their conflict years earlier by publicly demanding he quit hosting the Oscars because her husband didn't get nominated for concussion. She called for him to lose his job. He responded with mild jokes. She acted offended. And then, 6 years later, her husband came on stage and gave Chris what Chris described as an actual concussion. The wordplay on concussion, Will's film that started the whole feud, landing as the physical consequence of the slap, was exactly the kind of comedic inversion that reminds you why Chris Rock is one of the best to ever do it. He admitted he'd loved Will Smith his whole life, said he'd seen him open for Run DMC and rooted for him ever since. But now, he said, he watches the film Emancipation, Will's slavery drama, just to see Will get punished. He said it got him rooting for the wrong side. The room went from laughter to a sharp, uncomfortable silence and back to laughter in the space of seconds. That's the razor's edge Chris walks. He pushed the transgressive humor to the absolute limit and stuck the landing because his commitment to the bit was total. He closed the segment by answering the question he'd been asked for a full year. Why didn't he do anything when Will hit him? His answer: his parents raised him properly. They taught him not to fight in front of white people. The punchline devastated the audience, because beneath the joke lived something profound about how black men navigate spaces where their aggression will always be viewed through a specific lens. Chris's restraint wasn't weakness, it was generational wisdom. It was dignity transmitted from parent to child. It was everything the slap was not. The Dreamer, Chappelle's philosophical response. On New Year's Eve 2023, Netflix released Dave Chappelle's latest stand-up special, The Dreamer. It wasn't as focused on Will Smith as Selective Outrage had been, but Chappelle dedicated significant time to the incident, and what he offered was something entirely different from Chris's calculated demolition. Chappelle opened by describing watching Chris get slapped at the Oscars as one of the craziest things he'd ever seen. He admitted that watching it live, he genuinely wasn't sure if it was staged. The moment felt that surreal. Violence at the Oscars, a movie star assaulting a presenter. It couldn't be real, except that it was. Then Chappelle revealed something that nobody outside their inner circle knew. After the slap, he waited about 30 or 40 minutes, long enough for Chris to get to another party, and then called him on FaceTime. Chris picked up, and Chris told him that Chappelle was the only person he'd answered the phone for. Obama had called. Oprah had called. The most powerful names in entertainment and politics were lighting up Chris Rock's phone that night, trying to reach him, and Chris ignored every single one of them until Dave called. What does that tell you? It tells you that in the worst moment of his professional life, Chris Rock didn't want the sympathy of celebrities or the counsel of former presidents. He wanted to talk to someone who understood the specific violation of what it means to be attacked on stage, someone who operated in the same world, faced the same risks, and would process it as a peer rather than a spectator. Chappelle also brought his own Hollywood Bowl attack into the conversation, because he had to. For 3 months before his own attack, he told the Dreamer audience he had been making fun of Chris Rock, joking about the slap, asking audiences rhetorically what he would have done if Will had slapped him instead. He admitted honestly that to this day, he doesn't know exactly what he would have done, because nothing in his life had prepared him for a situation that extreme. But then he said he does know one thing Will Smith would not have been able to do afterward, and that's enjoy the rest of his evening. The implication was unmistakable, and it carried a completely different energy from anything Chris had said. Chris dissected Will intellectually. Chappelle's version of the threat was visceral and immediate. If Will had picked the wrong comedian, the night would have ended very differently. Chappelle returned to his Liverpool analysis, the mask of perfection that Will wore for 30 years. He stood by it. The slap, in Chappelle's reading, wasn't an aberration. It was a revelation. The real Will Smith had always been in there, somewhere beneath the blockbusters and the brand endorsements and the Fresh Prince legacy. The slap was that version of Will finally surfacing, whether he intended it to or not. But here is where Chappelle diverged most sharply from Chris. He maintained empathy for Will throughout. He didn't frame Will as calculating or cowardly the way Chris did. He framed Will as human, damaged, real in the way that only someone who stops performing can be. His statement, repeated from Liverpool, that he saw himself in both men, carried genuine weight. Chappelle wasn't above it. He was inside it. The two specials together created something extraordinary, a stereo portrait of the same incident from two different psychological angles. Chris's selective outrage was anger transformed into art, precise, devastating, accountable. Chappelle's dreamer was empathy transformed into philosophy, searching, honest, humane. Neither man coordinated the response. Neither was performing solidarity for cameras. They were each doing what comedians do, taking something painful and making it meaningful through craft. The permanent damage to Will Smith's reputation. So where does all of this leave Will Smith? He reportedly didn't watch Selective Outrage. He had people watch it for him and report back. According to sources close to him, he was embarrassed and hurt by what Chris said about him and his family. He felt that after trying to make amends, the YouTube apology, the outreach, Chris should move on. He was upset that Netflix gave Chris the platform. He felt that Chris bringing up Jada again crossed a line. But here is the fundamental problem with all of that. Will Smith crossed a line first, in front of millions of people, on live television, at the Oscars, and the response from Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle, two of the most respected voices in comedy, wasn't revenge. It was documentation. It was an artistic record of what happened, why it happened, and what it revealed about the man who did it. Chris's selective outrage didn't just mock Will Smith. It built a case, brick by brick, joke by joke, that the slap was not about protecting Jada. It was about Will Smith's ego, his humiliation, his need to perform strength in front of the world after his wife's affair stripped that strength away in private. And Chappelle's dreamer confirmed the deeper reading, that the slap revealed a version of Will Smith that 30 years of perfect branding had kept hidden from public view. Will Smith's career has not recovered. The ban from the Oscars, the projects quietly shelved, the endorsements reconsidered, the cultural conversation that pivots every time his name comes up, every time someone revisits the incident, and with 2 Netflix specials, a joint comedy tour, and thousands of hours of commentary archived online, people will keep revisiting it. The damage compounds. Chris Rock turned the slap into art that outlives the moment. Will Smith gave him the material. What this all means for comedy. Beyond Will Smith, beyond Chris and Chappelle, something larger shifted after that night at the Oscars. The invisible fence is gone. Comedy club owners said it. Comedians felt it. The unspoken social contract that protected performers from physical violence, decades of assumed safety built into the relationship between audience and artist, was publicly shattered when Will Smith walked onto that stage, hit a smaller man, sat back down, and then accepted a standing ovation. 5 weeks later, Dave Chappelle was tackled to the ground at the Hollywood Bowl.
Well, the man arrested for tackling comedian Dave Chappelle at the Hollywood Bowl Tuesday night will not face felony charges.
Other comedians reported increased aggression from audiences. Venues installed new barriers. Security protocols were rethought. The live comedy experience fundamentally changed because one man in one moment showed the world that a comedian could be hit and the consequences would be manageable. Comedy requires vulnerability. It requires the freedom to say things that might offend, might sting, might make people uncomfortable, with the understanding that words are words and they are not met with fists. The moment that understanding breaks down, the art form is in danger, not because comedians will stop making jokes, but because the environment in which jokes can exist freely will become constrained by fear. Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle responded to that threat the only way artists can, by continuing to perform, by making the attacks themselves into material. by refusing to let violence be the last word. Their joint tour was a statement. Their individual specials were statements. Their very willingness to stand on stages after being assaulted and deliver comedy with precision and courage was a statement. You can hit us. We're still going to be funnier than you. Will Smith thought a slap would end the conversation. Instead, it started one, and Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle have been running that conversation ever since. To sold-out crowds, to millions of Netflix viewers, to audiences who will be watching those specials for years to come. The slap lasted 2 seconds. The art it inspired will last forever. So here's what we know. Chris Rock used the most watched live comedy special in Netflix history to systematically dismantle Will Smith, his ego, his marriage, his psychology, and his moment of violence, with precision that no lawsuit, no press statement, and no apology video could ever answer. Dave Chappelle, speaking from the unique position of someone who was also attacked on stage and who counted Will Smith as something close to a peer, went further. He didn't just hold Will accountable, he held up a mirror and forced the question of who Will Smith really is when the cameras stop and the image drops away. Together, they didn't just expose Will Smith. They preserved their dignity, they protected their profession, and they created a permanent cultural record of what happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars decides that a comedian is a safe target. The verdict from comedy is in. The art is on record, and Will Smith is going to be living with the punchlines long after the headlines fade. Which response hit harder for you? Chris Rock's precision takedown in Selective Outrage, or Dave Chappelle's philosophical breakdown in The Dreamer? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story had you locked in from the beginning, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe, because we have more stories like this one waiting for you right now.